Hello, and welcome to another episode and the last episode of the season of Charles Weekly Party. I'm Charles, and before we get started, let's roll the holiday intro. Alright, so as I mentioned, this is the final episode of season 21. It's been a very exciting episode. It's been a very exciting season, and I'm happy to have gone through so many different bits of architecture and little bits of technology, and it's been, to some degree, the highlight of my week. Getting to sit down, record an episode, all that fun stuff. And around the holidays, because I mentioned this is partly a holiday episode, I think it's important to look back, reflect on the past year, and really go and figure everything out so that 2022 and season 22 can be a lot better. Now, to go back to the beginning of the season, I started off by saying that it was going to be an interesting ride, see where it would go, and here we are. And I think the best way to figure out what happened for the last 39 episodes is to look at some simple stats. So this past season, out of all 39 of the episodes, 7 of them were arc-episodes, not including the top 5 in arc, and 7 of them were tech-episodes, not including the top 5 in tech, and 3 of them were arc-episodes, not including the top 5 in arc. So, this past year, what I've really learned is that there are a lot of times when, even though I like focusing on technology and architecture, sometimes one of the two needs to hop in the driver's seat and head down the road a little bit. And personally, I think that's okay, and I think that's actually something that's going to be a little bit more prevalent in the future. Now, as you can see, they aren't evenly balanced, but that's because, to some degree, any week that I wanted to really try and consider doing an arc-episode, there was just a lot going on the technology side, so it didn't really make sense to do an arc-episode when I'd be missing out on all of the on very important information. So, looking at the top episodes, top 3 episodes were episodes 2126, 2113, and 2111. Now, I don't exactly have what those episodes are right on hand. I can find out pretty quickly, but the top episode I know was the episode I released right around the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So that episode was on, if I can remember correctly, it was on the reflecting pools, and on the technology side, as much as I would have liked to have left that as only focusing on the reflecting pools to make it a lot more, to make it its own episode, I needed to address a couple of technology updates. And that particular time, it was the end of the Apple versus Epic trial, which ended up in not a great state for both of them, and a slight little problem with an Australian bill. That was one basically saying that digital evidence tampering was allowed, which for me draws huge red flags. And since that had happened that past week, I couldn't just say, okay, I'm going to let this slide, not going to worry about it. That needed to be brought up quickly, and the Apple Epic trial I've been covering intermittently throughout the season. So putting the conclusion to that up was an equivalent must-have. So looking at the other two, 2113 was the Google I/O and a Playground. That was an episode that personally I thought should have been a tech-isode afterwards, because throughout the season, my goal has been to, for each episode, record a minimum amount but not go over a maximum amount. And without doing too much detective work, you could probably figure out that I have a minimum set of 30 minutes per episode, because I feel that that gives enough time for it to be really worth your while. Anything shorter than that, I feel, should be a bonus episode instead of being a full episode. So it's like having your favorite TV show only go on for part of the time it's supposed to. So when I initially started off, it was I was aiming for 50-minute episodes right around that time mark, but then for both your benefit and my benefit, it wasn't good for me to continue the way I started the first couple of episodes off. And that's entirely fine. Since this has been my first season of podcasting, I think it was really important to sit back and review exactly how and what I was doing. So for that first bit, what I was doing with one technology piece and one architecture piece didn't make a whole lot of sense. The architecture piece worked fine, but I was looking through technology pieces. A, there were too many of them to choose from, and B, well, although I could talk about some of them for long enough to give a 50-minute episode, it didn't make a lot of sense. So some things there were more to talk about, other things there were less. So that's why I aimed for it. That's why I aim for above 30 minutes, but try and keep it under an hour. Naturally, there are a few episodes that went over that hour mark, but those were special occasions. Going back to the Google I/O and a Playground episode, I spent the first few minutes really looking through a playground, and not as much time as I'd wanted to, because I needed to get to Google I/O, and this is why Techisodes and Archisodes exist. So looking through that episode, it took a lot of time to unpack everything that was discussed at Google I/O, and that playground I still remember. It's a pretty fun little location in Italy. And last but not least, episode 2111. Episode 2111 was the Lazy Bear Pool House. More CPU problems, and, well, that was actually the beginning of the Apple versus Epic trial, or at least that was when I first really weighed in on the whole situation. So, the Lazy Bear Pool House, not quite coming to mind as easily as I'd like it to, but looking at the addition of CPU vulnerabilities and what ended up being a very fiery trial were pretty important things as well. Now, I don't know why those are the top 3 episodes, but those 3 are the top episodes of the season. And that is from listens, with episode 2126 being the clear winner with what is still an unbelievable number of listens to it. The worst performing episode was episode 2121, which, if I can quickly recall, was about bricks, and more tech. That was an episode on brick architecture, which I wasn't as huge a fan of, and a game that turned GPUs into those same bricks. And I'm not talking about a little bit of magic that turns metal into ceramic, but, well, without going into too much, without going into specifics on turning metal into non-metal, having bricks in both the metaphorical sense and the physical sense in that episode. So, don't know why that was the case, but I know that the architecture that week wasn't my favorite of the season, as you could tell by the fact that it wasn't in the top 5. Taking the entire season together, I spent a total of 1 day, 4 hours, 37 minutes, and 28 seconds podcasting. And when I say that, that is the sum of the total amount of recording time, or of episode time, from the very first episode to the episode that was released last week. So that is how much content there is. So not only do I need to look at it as I spent a day of my life listening to this, recording this podcast, but you, listener, spent a day of your life listening to it. And I owe you a degree of appreciation for that. At the end of the episode is when I'm planning the full kudos to the listener piece, so stay tuned for that. But before I get too far off topic, the top 3 countries of listeners were the United States, which, no surprise because I do live in the United States, Germany, and Brazil. Within the United States, the top 3 U.S. states listenerships were Vermont at number 1, Ohio taking 2nd place, and Connecticut gets the bronze medal. So that's the statistics. Spotify actually was kind enough to reach out and give me a little bit of a statistical breakdown of the year, but they did that earlier on in December. And for this final episode, I wanted to take everything into account and get a precise number, so I added up all the seconds and minutes and the hours for those episodes that ended up being a little bit longer, and got the honest statistics for you. So now I think it's time to address what's next for the podcast. Because I mentioned this is the season finale. This is the conclusion of season 21. And I'm releasing this in the last week of 2021. So all around, it's a pretty big week. And it's been a conclusion to what's been a very interesting year. So first things first, a little break is in order. Chance to sit down, get a little bit of a breather in, and then, so I can fully assess what's going to happen next season. And also so that I can enjoy a little bit of time without having to think about doing all of the stuff needed for the podcast. And believe it or not, it is a lot of stuff, because that amount of time that you see of total recorded content, remember, each episode takes usually about that amount of time to produce after it's recorded, but also takes twice that amount of time to do the necessary research. So, not in every case, but in most cases. So you can see exactly how much time sort of went into producing this podcast this season. Hence why Little Break is in order. During this break, however, I will be releasing a trailer episode for Season 22. I know there's the first trailer, but I think a new season deserves a new trailer. And also a refreshed look. So, as you could probably tell, Season 22 will begin next year in 2022. And the full plan is to be fully determined and will be sort of announced in the season premiere. So, for me, this is going to be the time to really assess what worked, what didn't work, because I need to make sure that from the recording and producing side, I need to be on top of what I'm doing. Because if I'm not knowledgeable enough about what I'm talking about, or if I'm not putting in the effort needed to produce it, you're not going to get a quality product. So my goal is always making sure that I'm delivering a quality product, taking a little bit of time to step back and look at exactly what I'm doing is the perfect chance to really reassess what it is that's going on. So, like I said at the beginning, I found out pretty quickly one architecture piece and one technology piece didn't work well. And so I fixed that. How next season will go will be a little bit different of a determination. So maybe, I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe for some of the episodes, instead of always architecture first, technology second, it might switch on different episodes, or I might intersperse the two. We'll have to see. The other thing is, as I can find really good bridges between architecture and technology, I like using them, like the Kone elevator that I mentioned. Those little bits are really what sort of keep everything on track, because that's where, as I like to say, the technology and the architecture combine into one. And last but not least, taking the time to get some new, fresh backbone content for the podcast. If you've been listening or watching, you've seen that there's a cute little intro at the beginning of every video and an outro at the end. There is a little bit of work that's going to be done on both of those. The logo is staying the same, but the intro and outro will be changing ever so slightly, and that is from both an audio and video perspective. Due to the amount of time it takes to work on some of these, it's safe to say it's going to take a little bit of elbow grease to really get the episodes, the intro and outro, fine-tuned to be ready to produce. So, all I can say is it'll be interesting, it'll be a beautiful chance, and that the amount of time that the first intro took was incredible. You wouldn't think such a short little animated clip would take so much work to actually do. But I kid you not, figuring out everything that was going on for that, and for everything involved in the backbone content, took 10 hours that first time. I'm impressed that it actually got done, because there was one weekend where I sat down, made the intro, made the outro, did the research, recorded the podcast and produced or did all the producing work for it. By the end of that weekend, I was just really exhausted. So hopefully I won't have to do that much work in a short period of time to get the next intro and outro set up. Something else I'd like to mention is sponsorships. This season, because it's been the first season, I haven't done much of anything with sponsorships because it's been a let's get the ball up and moving, and it's been a lot of work, but a lot of experimentation. But now that the podcast has been sort of established, I've decided that for the benefit of not only me as the leading force behind it, but you all as listener can benefit from all of the opportunities that sponsorships provide. So while they provide a sort of monetary and equipment benefit to me, any benefit to me ends up being a benefit to you. So one of my goals is to be getting new microphones, and I say microphones because it's not always me on. Sometimes I have guests. And of course, all of that takes money. So while there is the listener support option always available that I mention at the end of every episode, I'm also announcing that for season 22, sponsorships will be available. And out of fairness to the listener and to the sponsor, any sponsored episodes, I'll mention exactly who the sponsor is. They'll have a little spot. Nice. It'll be short and sweet. And the content will be unobstructed. I'd also like to make the guarantee that for content perspective, no content will be altered or skewed to benefit a sponsor. So if it's not something I would say in an unsponsored episode, then I wouldn't say it in a sponsored one. Basically saying, if I think a building does not look great, just because the architecture firm that made it is sponsoring it, I'm not going to suddenly say it looks great, if you catch my drift. So for sponsorships that are available, anyone who wants to sponsor an episode will be able to reach out, and sponsorships will be available on a per episode basis, for an equipment basis, or for web services. And any of those sponsorships, of course, sponsors will be vetted to make sure that they serve the interests of both this podcast and the listeners. And I think it goes without saying that I will do the best to make sure that opening up to sponsorships doesn't cause detriment, because I've seen it happen to other content creators, and my goal is to make sure that the content... I've seen it happen before, and I don't want to see it happen here. The content needs to be the content, the sponsorship needs to be the sponsor. Sometimes things will work out nice and beautifully, and other times things might not be as beautiful, and once again, it'll be a sort of game of experimentation, but we'll see how that goes. So if you are interested in a sponsorship opportunity, please reach out via social media, direct messages, or you can leave a voice message on Anchor. My recommended method is using social media to directly message me, and I'll be able to take care of that. And I think that's the best solution, but do whatever works best for you. enough about the nitty-gritties of sponsorships. I'd like to talk about guests. I know I've had Michael on for a couple of episodes this year. However, I am planning for season 22 to have more guests on. So, once again, going on the fact that this year has been a year of establishing the podcast. At the beginning, I could guarantee if I went up to someone and said, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast, trying to be a guest on it," that would not have gone well. However, now I'm proud to say that there are a few people who have reached out about being guests on the show, and I'm happy to be inviting more people on for next season. And assuming he's fine with it, I'm happy to say that I'll be inviting Michael back for an episode or two as well. Another thing back at the beginning of the podcast was a discussion on food. I know I mentioned in that first 2-minute clip of the pilot episode what Charles Weekly Party really was. And realistically, I don't think it's changed a heck of a lot. However, I know that I mentioned I talk occasionally about food. Did that happen? No, it didn't. I said occasionally because that, in my mind, maybe architecture or technology was not going to work out to talk about that week, and so maybe I'd end up talking about food. I'm proud to say that architecture and technology have not let me down. So I haven't had to sit back and say, okay, what great recipe did I have this past week that I really want to talk about? Instead, it sort of slid by unnoticed. And I think from the listenership I've seen, no one's really been worried about the fact that I haven't talked about food, although if I'm wrong about that, you can definitely, once again, reach out social media or a voice message, let me know. Maybe I'm completely crazy. Maybe everyone was like, oh, could you have mentioned some type of food during the episodes? But oh well. That happened this year. That'll be a feedback item. And if it's something that people want, then yeah, maybe I will spend a couple minutes talking about food each episode. But I do have to remember that my primary passion is talking about architecture and technology. And that's where the primary focus is going to be. But speaking of feedback, this is the perfect time for feedback. Any and all feedback is greatly appreciated, because this is your chance to shape Season 22. This time of evaluation is not happening in a silo, because neither architecture nor technology should happen in a silo. Now is the time to toss in your ideas, your thoughts, what you liked, what you didn't like. And yes, I know that there are things that some people liked, and I know there are some things that people didn't like. And it's important for me as a podcaster to know what does and doesn't work. Sure, I can tell from metrics maybe something worked good here, something didn't work well there, and do a little bit of that digging around. But what I have to do is make sure that my next season is taking the best of this season and carrying it forward. So if you'd like to give your feedback, leave a voice message. That's what they're there for. You can always go and message via social media. And I do encourage you to follow us on social media. Right now we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the reason I say that is because there are some weeks this past year where I was planning on making an episode, and then we all know life works out perfectly all the time. I wasn't able to record the episode that I wanted to, or or at least not be able to do it with a decent quality standard. So on those occasions where I was planning an episode and there isn't one happening, that little detail will be posted on social media. If I'm not taking the time to produce the podcast, I'm going to take the time to put a mention on social media and say, hey, I wanted to get an episode out today. Things aren't going the way I wanted to. Not going to happen today. So I'm not going to go and release a little 2-minute clip that says, oh, by the way, no podcast today. Sorry. I find it easiest and best to use social media for that because that's what it's really designed for, keeping you on the up-to-date end of what's going on with everything Weekly Party. Now, last and most definitely not least, is the time where I need to really, truly say thank you. I've mentioned about all of the work that I've done to make this podcast happen. I mentioned that it took days out of my life this year to make this podcast happen. But I think it's equally important and equally admirable that you took that same time out of your lives to listen to me talk. And I think that's absolutely astounding that so many of you have taken the time to go and maybe you're doing it in the background, maybe you're doing you're doing something and you have Charles Weekly Party in your headphones, or maybe you have it playing out loud so that everyone around you can hear it. Either way, thank you for taking the time to listen this past season, because starting out a podcast wasn't the easiest thing, and seeing that there are actually people taking the time to listen to what I have to say is amazing, and that is what has kept this going. I could have said at the beginning, not a lot of people are interested in this. Why do I keep doing it? Or why should I keep doing it? But the fact that there are more people listening now than there were at the beginning, that's what makes my day. Seeing not only that I've released an episode, but seeing the next day that there are people who have actually taken the time to listen to it. So, without you, there would be no purpose in producing and recording these episodes. So I thank you for that, because realize it or not, you're also doing me a service, not only the fact that making sure that I can keep the podcast up and running, but also keeping the podcast going, make sure that I get the chance to learn about new pieces of architecture, new bits of technology that I might not have otherwise. It's almost at the point where sitting down each week to do the hours of research necessary to produce an episode is a highlight, because I get to sit down, I get to learn, and sometimes I've gone down a rabbit hole. When I was looking at the Edmonton Public Library, ironically enough, I was in a library doing that research, and just working my way down through it, it got me so fascinated with both architecture and technology, sitting down for that episode. That research went on a lot longer, but I walked out of that library with a lot more knowledge than I had walked in with. And realize it or not, that good feeling is all thanks to you. Couldn't do it without you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. It goes so much further than you'd think. So, wrapping up today, it's been a wonderful season. There are 40 episodes, including this episode without including the bonus or trailer episodes. And all 40 of them have been a pleasure to record. Some of them I've recorded in comfortable places, others I've just been in the middle of the best spot I could find on vacation, which is why some of these episodes were audio only. And other times I've had everything ready, right there ready, waiting. There have been hot days, cold days, in-between days, and all of it's been a blast. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you enjoyed this season. So, closing out today, I can't, my party for the day, the month, the year is just thank you for being there, thank you for your listening, and thank you for your support. It's been a great year. I'm looking forward to a great next year. And that's really all I can say. So, do be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting app so you don't miss any future episodes. And when I say app, you could do it in your web browser too, whichever. I poked around the statistics. I know where the listens are. Not all of you do it on your phones. And you can go to anchor.fm/CharlesWeeklyParty, where you can listen to any previous episode, interact with voice messages, or support the podcast. I will say that you should definitely follow us on social media, Twitter and Facebook. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can see the action on YouTube. And if anything, I'd say pop onto YouTube for this episode if you want to see the cute little holiday intro that was made. So not a huge change, but enough of a tweak that you might find it fun. You might find it cute. Definitely, if you have social media, follow us there. Again, I can't stress that enough because what's going to end up happening, I'm anticipating getting the first episode of season 22 out in January. I'm not exactly sure when that'll happen. So social media will give you a heads up when that episode is released, or when the episode is planning to be released. And there are other over the break changes that are in the works that once they take effect, you'll need to sort of be following on social media to make sure that you stay in the know. And if you don't, I will say, using something, as long as you're using something like Apple Podcasts, which is where most people listen to it, you'll be able to continue receiving the episodes. So there are some changes, some behind-the-scenes changes in the works. Not all of them are complete, and that'll happen over break before the trailer episode is released. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for your time, your energy this year, and I look forward to giving you my time and energy next year. Take care. Roll the outro.